Sinead O Connor, Empath or Narcissist, Part 16. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We have gone through a significant amount of evidence from a variety of different sources to look at the question of what was Sinead O Connor with regard to the classification that I use to determine was she an empath, a narcissist, a normal, or a narcissistic individual but was not a narcissist. We're going to take into account in this part the issue of her mental health. Sinead O Connor experienced what many would say would be every parent's worst nightmare on January the 7th, 2022, when she learned that her son, Shane O'Connor, had died by suicide. The 17-year-old had been under suicide watch at an Irish hospital after 2 previous attempts to take his life. In a social media post, the singer confirmed that her beautiful son, who was the light of her life, had decided to end his earthly struggle. Grief-stricken, O'Connor blamed the national family authorities known as Tudor for not properly supervising a child who was at suicide risk. In a series of since-deleted tweets, she wrote in part, "May God forgive the Irish state, for I never will. Too many kids are dying on Tudor's watch." She eulogized her son, whom she shared with her ex, folk singer Donal Looney. "This is for my Shaney," Sinead tweeted. "The light of my life, the lamp of my soul, my blue-eyed baby. You will always be my light. We will always be together. No boundary can separate us." The singer's later tweets hinted that she, too, was feeling mentally fragile. On January the 13th, 2022, she tweeted on her unverified account, "I'm a piece of shit. I don't deserve to live, and everyone who knows me will be better off without me. I am sorry for all the harm I caused." Her tweets following the death of her son grew increasingly more alarming, particularly one, which has now been deleted, that stated, "I've decided to follow my son. There's no point living without him." Shortly afterward, O'Connor followed up, apologizing for the statement and sharing that she was seeking help. "I am with cops now on way to hospital. I'm sorry I upset everyone," O'Connor shared. "I am lost without my kid, and I hate myself. Hospital will help a while, but I'm going to find Shane. This is just a delay." The singer has struggled with the effects of trauma for decades. As we know, she was raised by an abusive mother. The extent of that abuse, of course, may vary dependent on who you ask, but it's clear that there is evidence that she was abused. O'Connor has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, PTSD, and borderline personality disorder as an adult. She's also coped with issues concerning addiction. In 2015, her mental health worsened following a hysterectomy and the hormonal changes that followed. Her attempts to find meaning in life led her to join the Latin Tridentine Church sect as a priest. In 2018, she converted to Islam. There have been numerous instances of outspoken behavior, tweets and posts on social media that have caused concern and have repeatedly caused people to question the mental health of Sinead O'Connor. It is clear that she had mental health issues. That naturally needs to be taken into account with the context of understanding what she was. First of all, let us consider the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder. As you should know from my work, I do not determine that that is an appropriate diagnosis. For reasons that I set out in my video, borderline, and also why the borderline is not what you think. If you haven't watched those videos, I'd encourage you to do so. It'll enable you to understand the viewpoint that I have with regard to the issue of borderline personality disorder in greater detail. In summary, I regard those that have been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder either as individuals who've been misdiagnosed with regard to post-traumatic stress disorder, or they're actually narcissists and they're given the title of BPD when really it should be NPD. There may be some of you who disagree with this. I can understand that. But I would invite you to watch my video about the borderline so that you understand why it is that I have reached that conclusion. Accordingly, for the purposes of my assessment, I would reject the suggestion of borderline personality disorder, and therefore, as per what we're left with, that would mean either Sinead O Connor exhibited narcissistic personality disorder because she was diagnosed as BPD, but it's actually NPD, or it was part of a post-traumatic stress disorder that manifested in a way which was seen as BPD, but actually wasn't. Accordingly, we can strike BPD from the record and place it as either she's a narcissist or that she's something else, and that it was post-traumatic stress disorder. What about the suggestion that she had bipolar disorder? Well, it is quite common for narcissists to suggest that their poor behaviours are as a consequence of them being bipolar, and that's a subtle form of blame shifting that takes place. I don't see that bipolar disorder was applicable in the case of Sinead O Connor. There are instances where bipolar disorder and narcissistic personality disorder overlap. They do have similarities. And I will be doing a future video about the similarities and differences of bipolar disorder and narcissistic personality disorder to help you understand more about that. I don't want to go into the detail of it now, as this would unnecessarily lengthen this particular part of the series. Accordingly, either her diagnosis of bipolar disorder was actually because she's a narcissist, or that it was an inappropriate diagnosis because it was episodic in nature. Now, bipolar is meant to be episodic, but you can see from Sinead O Connor's behaviours that she repeatedly and regularly engaged in what would be deemed as inappropriate behaviour, unpleasant behaviour, unusual behaviour. And to my mind, it didn't have the episodic flavour of bipolar disorder. And therefore, I would suggest that either those behaviours were a manifestation of narcissistic personality disorder, or, again, they were linked to post-traumatic stress disorder. That they were of greater longevity with regard to the frequency and occurrence of the behaviours and in the circumstances. And this is something that also she maintained, that she didn't think that the diagnosis was actually appropriate. Therefore, I would discount bipolar. We're then left with the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's clear that she had a number of mental health problems. That cannot be denied. And to my mind, having explained what I've just detailed to you, the behaviours that she exhibited were either manifestations of narcissistic personality disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder as a consequence of being an empath with PTSD, a normal with PTSD, or a narcissistic person with PTSD. I've explained it this way to clarify matters, because I know that many people in the comments section have said, well, in determining what she is, she had bipolar, she had PTSD, she had borderline personality disorder. I recognise all of that, but remember, the purpose of this exercise is to place her within one of the four categories of NPD, empath, normal, or narcissistic. The conditions and behaviours that she exhibited can readily be explained to demonstrate that it wasn't bipolar and it wasn't borderline. It's actually, and it's not post-traumatic stress disorder, it's narcissism, it's narcissistic personality disorder, and they were misdiagnosed. Or it isn't narcissistic personality disorder, it isn't bipolar, it isn't borderline personality disorder, it is post-traumatic stress disorder alongside being narcissistic, a normal, or an empath. Accordingly, this leaves us with the 4 choices still, one of them being NPD and the other 3 being whatever the appropriate outcome is, with her also suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We now approach the conclusion. You have heard a considerable amount of evidence. There is more evidence that I've considered that I haven't included in this. Otherwise, it would have been double the length. I've read the entirety of her memoirs and utilised the material there. There have been further interviews that I've watched with her that have formed part of the overall analysis. I've drawn representative aspects. So, for example, certain things that are found in her memoirs are also repeated in the interviews, so I don't need to double up on that by repeating them again, but they have been taken into account. So there's a huge body of evidence from the interviews, from the newspaper articles, from her memoirs, from what other people have said about her, from what she said about herself. And I'm now going to provide that all in aggregate, because we must look at all of those behaviours over a sustained period of time to make a determination. And therefore, when I take you through the conclusion, it will either be to demonstrate that she is a narcissist and she has narcissistic personality disorder, or that she is an empath that has post-traumatic stress disorder, or that she's a normal that has post-traumatic stress disorder, or she's narcissistic but not a narcissist, has post-traumatic stress disorder. The only instance where she won't have PTSD is if she's found to be a narcissist. Accordingly, there will be an announcement shortly as to when the conclusion will be aired, and you can find out whether what you think she is accurate. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.